Thank you for that introduction. It's a pleasure for me to be talking to folks in Wisconsin right now. I taught for 8 years at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. I was telling Michael I'm both sad and happy that I'm not in Wisconsin in February right now, but it's a privilege to be talking to you about this research that I've been working on. And I wanted to start by giving you just a warning that I'm going to have more questions than answers in this talk for reasons that I will get into. Uh, Spoiler, we have a survey that's supposed to be coming out of the field any day now, and I was really hoping it would be in before today, but it's not. But I'm going to talk about what we're doing and what we think we might find. Uh, and I see you in the great. Okay. So my talk's on direwolves, dodos, and dinosaurs, media messages and public perceptions of de-extinction. And I apologize for going wild with the alliteration there. I couldn't resist. Uh, I also want to acknowledge the graduate students who have been working on this project with me. They're Liam Cuddy and Russell Hartley, Clara May, Hera Nadim, Aaron Oitinen, Sadia Ratna, and Minhas Uden. So we've got some stuff in the works that I'll be talking about. So I wanted to start by talking about a news story from almost 1 year ago. Given that you're in a life sciences colloquium, you have probably had a chance to hear about this, but in case you haven't, in April of last year, a tech company by the name of Colossal Biosciences announced that they had produced a dire wolf, a cub, or actually several cubs from a species that had gone extinct. And so this announcement got a fair amount of news coverage. So here's a headline from CNN and another one from Fox News. And you might notice even from these headlines, there are some slightly different takes on this announcement. So CNN, it's scientists say. Fox News, it's U.S. company claims. CNN talks about resurrecting this species. Fox News talks about bringing it back from extinction. CNN talks about the dire wolf. Fox News talks about the wolf made famous in Game of Thrones. So that'll be a theme going forward. This sort of pop culture and the idea of reviving extinct species. New York Times covered it. I actually had their story out a day before with even more nuance in their headlines. So scientists survived the dire wolf or something close. And so they also get the Game of Thrones reference in their original story. Interesting also, about a month later, the New York Times Magazine had a kind of more critical, skeptical piece with the headline, "There's no undo button for extinct species," raising some themes that we'll be getting into. So here I want to talk about Colossal Biosciences a little more. So they've had a very active, in addition to putting out press releases and generating a lot of news coverage, they have a very active presence on social media. Multiple platforms. They tend to, looks like they post similar content across different platforms. So I wanted to show a fairly short video that they have on both their YouTube account and their TikTok account. So this is about 2 minutes long, I think. So hopefully the technology will play along. If you're not hearing Beth Shapiro, PhD, in just a second, just let me know, and I have a backup plan here. But here is what they had to say about how exactly they went about doing what they said they did.
Essentially, there are 7 steps to making a dire wolf. The first step is to find actual dire wolf fossils. We go out into the field, into museums, and we find remains that look like they're going to be really well preserved. Second, we have to generate this genome sequence from a dire wolf. So we use the tools of ancient DNA. We take the fossils that we found, we grind them up, and we extract preserved DNA. And DNA is not going to be in great condition, but we can still get all of the information that we need, even if the tiny little DNA fragments are broken and damaged and really small. The third step, then, is to identify what it is that made a dire wolf like a direwolf and not like a gray wolf. To do this, we line the direwolf genome up against the gray wolf genome on a computer, and we scan them, looking for where they're different from each other. This is how we identify the core genes. What is it in that DNA code that makes a direwolf a direwolf? Once we've identified the genes that we want to change, it's time to design the tools that we're going to use to actually make those edits in living cells. This is part of the genome engineering process. After we've done that, we move on to step 5, which is actually using those tools to make the edits. This is where we're working with cells in a dish in a lab, and we are actually going into the genomes of those cells and cutting out the gray wolf versions of the genes and pasting in their place the direwolf versions of those genes. After we have those edited cells, it's time to turn that into a living animal. So step 6, embryo transfer. This is where we take these cells and we take another cell that has had its nucleus removed, so it doesn't have any of its own DNA, and we inject in its place our edited genome sequence. And then we're on to the final step, transfer those edited embryos into a surrogate maternal host who's going to eventually give birth to our direwolf.
All right, so the TikTok version is a backup, but
there are
seems like that worked. So the question I have for you now is, does this whole project, and especially the way that Shapiro talked about in that video, remind you of anything, like say, especially from the world of popular film? Feel free to shout out and answer. The mosquitoes in amber, yeah. From Jurassic Park. Yeah, I think they actually talk about that in the exact same scene that I had in mind after I watched that specific video. The scene from the first Jurassic Park movie where uh, uh, Sam Neill's character and Laura Dern's character and Jeff Goldblum's character get the video about how Jurassic Park was created, narrated not by a human scientist, but by Mr. DNA. And to me, it's almost eerie how the Colossal Biosciences video hits some of the exact same beats in the explanation as Jurassic Park's does. Of course, that might not be completely a coincidence. Before I get to that, it also reminded me of one of my favorite tweets from the past few years. So this is from Alec Bleckman, who's a writer for The Onion, where he said, scenario, science fiction author, in my book, I invented the Torment Nexus as a cautionary tale. Tech company, at long last, we have created the Torment Nexus from the classic sci-fi novel, Don't Create the Torment Nexus. Jurassic Park, famously a cautionary tale about reviving extinct species. But it might be more complicated than that. I'll get to that. Now that tweet kind of captures, meant to be humorous, but it captures a common theme in some of the reactions, public reactions from in the media, from the scientific community about what Colossal Biosciences has been up to with de-extinction. Colossal Biosciences has also responded to some of these themes and put out its own themes on its social media accounts. So they have a variety of videos, a variety of messages. Some of them lean pretty hard into the pop culture side of what they're doing. So not only did they revive a species prominently featured in the popular HBO series Game of Thrones, actually named one of the dire wolf pups after Khaleesi, which is a reference to a Game of Thrones character. A queen title, basically. Colossal Biosciences is also very aware that people are going to be talking about what they're doing in terms of Jurassic Park and Jurassic World pop culture references. And so they have a number of videos where they reply to the idea that what they're doing is similar to what's going on in Jurassic Park. In addition to that, Colossal has also, when looking at their messaging, we observe that there's a regular theme of pitching what they're doing as not just a way to revive extinct species, but also as a tool for preserving or conserving existing endangered species. They have multiple videos on this theme, and they also talk about it in their PR and their media appearances. So 13 Ways to De-extinction is accelerating conservation. And they talk about, oh, here's an endangered wolf species. What we're doing could help preserve these specific species, in addition to reviving the ones that they're trying to revive. Now, as I've alluded to, not everyone in the scientific community is as enthusiastic about this as colossal biosciences is. So even looking back more than 10 years ago, Scientific American published a piece suggesting that efforts to revive extinct species might actually do more harm than good in terms of preserving endangered species. Perhaps by removing the urgency of preserving species, if we just think, oh, well, if we drive them to extinction, we can always revive them later as long as we collect some of their DNA first. Science Magazine also published a piece in 2017 suggesting that de-extinction efforts would be a kind of compete for resources with preservation. So if people are spending a lot of money to revive extinct species, maybe that's fewer resources that are going to preserving existing species. And some of these same themes came up in scientific reactions and media messages about Colossal Science's dire wolf announcement. Also, some debate in the scientific community that spilled over to the media about whether we can really call this de-extinction or not, or whether it's actually more like de-extinction. Whether these animals that Colossal Biosciences are presenting as dire wolves are really dire wolves or just modern day wolves with some genetic changes to them. Now, I find this example fascinating because it sits at an intersection of two closely related lines of research that I've been working on that I know Mike has also been working on the first of these, which is media messages and attitudes about emerging technologies. So there's a fairly sizable literature exploring how media use and exposure to specific media messages can shape beliefs and attitudes about technologies that are new in society, artificial intelligence and facial recognition technology, and gene editing in other contexts. These are all topics that I've looked at in my research, and I know Michael had a recent piece on the last one of these in Journal of Science Communication, which actually has influenced our work on this subject. Also lately, I and some of my colleagues have been looking at media messages and attitudes about what we could call speculative technologies, technologies that aren't feasible right now, but might or might not be feasible in the future. For example, we've looked at media messages and media use and attitudes about the prospect of uploading a human consciousness to a computer, mind uploading, or terraforming, that is using technology to make other planets habitable for humans. So these are things that are pretty far off in the future if they're ever going to happen, but some of the same media processes that influence attitudes and beliefs about emerging technologies, it turns out, also apply to speculative technologies. De-extinction arguably sits at the intersection of these two. If you listen to Colossal Biosciences, then it's an emerging technology. It's something that they've actually accomplished. If you listen to some of their critics, this is still in the domain of speculative technology. Now, in terms of theories to explain how media messages might shape beliefs and attitudes about de-extinction through gene editing, we're drawing on some kind of classic media effects theories. So one is cultivation, which you may be already familiar with. It goes back to George Gerbner's work in the late 60s and early 70s. The idea here is that the messages that dominate the media system, and Gerbner and his colleagues originally focused on television, but we could broaden this out to the media system in general, that dominant messages in the media system will be reflected in the perceptions and beliefs of audience members, especially among those who consume the most media. Like most people don't have a lot of experience with gene editing, let alone de-extinction in their day-to-day lives. So the way that they perceive it will be based off of media images. Now, the original version of cultivation theory focused on the media system as a whole. But kind of revisionist take on cultivation theory highlights the role that consumption of specific media genres can play in cultivating perceptions. Especially relevant here would be science fiction, which has presented images of a lot of these emerging and speculative technologies that we've been talking about. Uh, Also raises the question, what are some of the underlying mechanisms, more kind of micro level mechanisms that might explain media cultivation? So original cultivation theory wasn't too into these mechanisms, but subsequent research has suggested, for example, priming and cognitive accessibility could play a role here. Also, especially interested in narrative transportation and perceptual realism. So narrative transportation, basically the idea that the more that audience members are immersed or caught up in the world of a story, a media story, the more opportunity that story will have to shape their beliefs and perceptions. So if you're watching Jurassic Park and you're really into it, then you're less thinking critically about the messages you're seeing, and maybe you might be more open to persuasion, narrative persuasion. Perceptual realism, this comes from the work of people like David Kirby, is the idea that the power of media messages to shape beliefs and attitudes depends in part on how plausible or realistic they seem to audience members, which is not the same thing as how scientifically accurate they are. From this theoretical perspective, true accuracy matters a lot less than whether it feels and looks and seems accurate. And so Jurassic Park is an interesting case here because when it was first released, and even today, is very famous for presenting perceptually realistic images of revived dinosaurs. And that famous scene where they hold off on showing the dinosaurs until Dr. Grant and his colleagues actually see the Brachiosaurus in that full wide open shot. Another theoretical framework that we're bringing to bear on this topic is framing. So frames are essentially storylines that media messages give audience members ways to understand a topic. So we know from research in a lot of areas of science and emerging technology that there's a set of frames that the media use from topic to tell stories about science and technology. So too many to go over right now, but one frame I want to highlight is the social progress frame, which is the idea that this new technology is going to make people's lives better, improve society. So artificial intelligence is going to help doctors diagnose diseases, or gene editing is going to get rid of malaria by wiping out mosquitoes. Or in this particular case, de-extinction is going to help conserve existing endangered species. Another common frame in media messages about emerging and speculative technology is Pandora's box, or Frankenstein's monster, or runaway science. Here's the idea that this new development in technology is going to cause unintended negative consequences. So artificial intelligence is going to become sentient and wipe us out like Skynet or HAL in 2001. Or in this particular case, the most famous example of this would be the one presented in Jurassic Park, where they revive dinosaurs and then the dinosaurs go around eating people. So maybe not a win there. There's been not much research specifically focused on de-extinction. Again, some on media messages and attitudes and beliefs about gene editing, but less specifically focusing on gene editing. I do want to talk a little bit about research that I and my colleagues have done on this. So just a few questions and a few preliminary findings. So in 2016, Barbara Lay and I included a few questions on the Cooperative Election Survey. So this is a survey, a national representative survey conducted by YouGov. I'll come back to the Cooperative Election Survey in a few minutes. So we got a sample of 1,000 people, and we asked them two questions about de-extinction. We asked them, think about scientists bring an extinct species back to life. Do they strongly favor it, oppose it, or strongly oppose it? And you can see from the results there, more opposition than support in 2016. We also asked our respondents whether they thought it was definitely this would definitely happen, probably not happen, or would definitely not happen. And a majority said it wouldn't happen. We also included some measures of media use. And we looked at the relationships between people's media habits and their attitudes and perceptions of de-extinction. And one thing we found was that television news viewing was positively related both to support for de-extinction and perceptions that it was likely to happen. Now, in 2016, there was not a lot of media coverage of this topic. So we're not necessarily thinking that messages specifically about de-extinction are what's driving it. I think it's probably more likely that broader media messages about science and technology influence things like support for uh, technology, positive attitudes towards science, deference to scientific authority, and then those mediate the influence of TV viewing on attitudes about de-extinction and beliefs about whether it's going to happen. We also found that having seen Jurassic World was positively related to both predicted support and perceived likelihood. So Jurassic World came out. We asked about Jurassic World because it came out in 2015, which coincidentally is the year that Beth Shapiro, Colossal Biosciences, the spokesperson, published a book called How to Clone a Woolly Mammoth, The Science of De-Extinction. Now, at first glance, this pattern might seem a little surprising because the whole point of the Jurassic Park, Jurassic World franchise ostensibly is that this is a bad idea, that playing God with dinosaur DNA is going to result in lots of people getting eaten by dinosaurs. Now, this relationship we found, it's quite possible that it's actually picking up just a tendency. The kinds of people who think de-extinction is great are also the kinds of people who might watch a movie like Jurassic World. But I also have a hunch that maybe something else could be going on here, which is that there's the ostensible message of the Jurassic Park franchise, which is that this is a bad idea. And then there's the subtext of the Jurassic Park franchise, which is that, but wouldn't it be cool? And so I wonder if it's the second message that is actually more powerful than the first message. In 2020, we revisited this topic with another nationally representative survey, this one done by the National Opinion Research Center. Here I was working with Wyatt Dawson, Ashley Paintsell, and James Bingaman. This time around, we only asked one question, and it was a attitude measure. We asked people whether they supported or opposed using gene editing to bring extinct species back to life. And as before, more opposition than support. This time we had a neutral option, so the distribution looked a little different. And in 2021, we did a national quota sample using Qualtrics panels. We asked people whether they supported or opposed using gene editing to bring extinct species back to life. And again, more opposition than support. Uh, a little closer, but I wouldn't necessarily compare these results because the sampling methods are different. Uh, so we published our findings for these in a 2022 article called CRISPR Images. That article looked at these items as part of a broader index of support for gene editing. This talk, I isolated the items looking specifically at bringing extinct species back to life and reran our analyses just looking at those single items. And what I found was pretty similar to what we found for the broader scale, which is that science news use or technology news use predicts support for bringing extinct species back to life. Overall, television viewing did as well, which would be consistent with the cultivation, a classic cultivation, although with gene editing to revive extinct dinosaur, revive extinct species, the relationship was more marginal. Somewhat to our surprise, in neither study did we find a significant relationship between science fiction viewing and support for de-extinction. So that brings me to the present. So in September of last year, my colleague Dana Young said, "Hey, we're doing this cooperative election survey module in October. Do you want to add any questions? We have just a little bit of room." So My advice to you in life is if anyone ever asks you if you want to include questions on a nationally representative sample, you say yes. So we scrambled to come up with, we'd already been talking about revisiting this topic of de-extinction. So we scrambled to come up with some questions. We ended up only having room for 4 questions. So we were like, so what can we do to leverage 4 questions as much as possible to get new insights into this topic? So fortunately for us, Dana had already included a battery of media use measures in the module, and we added 2 more measures. So they already had national newspapers, MSNBC, CNN, social media, Fox News, and podcasts. We added science fiction television shows or movies and science documentary television shows or movies. We also added a couple questions about de-extinction. And here's where the leveraging comes in. So we decided to do a survey experiment. So before we asked people what they thought about de-extinction, we gave them a little introduction to the topic. So we started off, everybody got the prompt, as you may know, scientists have been exploring the use of gene editing to revive extinct species of animals. From there, people could get one of 2 frames. And we tried to make these as balanced as possible and brief. Uh, and we were especially interested in, we noticed this theme in Colossal's messaging and some of the pushback against that messaging about the implications of de-extinction for preserving endangered species. So 1 frame that people could get was, some say, or others say, this would provide opportunities to restore species that have gone extinct due to human activity. People could also get prompt that said this would undermine efforts to preserve existing species endangered by human activity. But we did a combination. So some people got no frame. Some people just got the pro de-extinction frame. Some people only got the anti de-extinction frame. Some people got the pro, then the anti. Some people got the anti and then the pro. Because research on competitive framing suggests that the effects of competing frames can neutralize the effects of framing. So we were interested not just to see whether individual frames could influence people's attitudes, but also whether including a competing frame could blunt that effect. So that was one manipulation we did, but we combined that with a second manipulation in terms of what species, if any, was mentioned as an exemplar of de-extinction. So one condition was there was no species mentioned. So people just got the base version of the question. Some people were asked, such as the woolly mammoth. Other people got the dodo bird. And still other people got the Tyrannosaurus rex or T-Rex. Now, you might be thinking at this point, Colossal Biosciences has a whole video about this, that dodo bird is redundant. That a scientist would not say dodo bird. And they're right about that. It's like saying like falcon bird or eagle bird, but we wanted to, this is a survey of the broader public, and we wanted to make these questions as clear as possible. So instead of going by what Colossal Biosciences said, we went by what Phineas and Ferb said. If you know the theme song for that show, it is Finding a Dodo Bird. Uh, so we chose these species deliberately, partly because they're different kinds of species. We have a mammal, we have a reptile, we have a bird. Mammoths and dodo birds, Colossal Biosciences has ambitions to revive both of those, so they have lots of media messages talking about those specific animals. Also, they vary in the extent to which humans might be implicated in their extinction. So T-Rex, we didn't have anything to do with that. That was the asteroid. Woolly mammoth, we were around for their extinction. Maybe we had something to do with that. It's kind of hazy. Dodo bird, that's on us. So with these 2 manipulations, we had a total of 20 combinations, 5 framing conditions times 4 species conditions. So our expectations are the pro frame will lead to more support and more perception, a greater perceived likelihood of de-extinction. The con frame will have the opposite effect. The competitive framing conditions will neutralize each other. Maybe an expectation that there'll be higher support for de-extinction, for the dodo bird and the woolly mammoth, which humans might have had something to do with, then the T-Rex, which also has these negative connotations from the Jurassic Park, Jurassic World franchise. But I don't have the data for you yet. Next month, hopefully we will have that, and we will have results to see if we're right about all of that. So this is what it looks like in the context of the survey. And in this condition, they got both frames, and then they got the woolly mammoth. But again, that's only one of 20 possibilities. Next month, we're also going to start a content analysis of the social media messages out there about de-extinction. So we're launching this next month. I'm teaching an undergraduate course on content analysis. And so this is one of the projects that students in that class are going to be working on. So the plan is to focus on TikTok. Maybe at some point we'll also compare across platforms. Like I mentioned, it seems like on Instagram Reels and YouTube, Colossal is posting some similar content. 1 year time frame, so conveniently, almost a year ago, Colossal made their announcement. So that's a logical starting point for our analysis here. In terms of finding videos, we're still figuring that out. TikTok is not the easiest platform to search for content for a content analysis. I've been very interested in best practices for sampling TikTok videos. If someone wants to write a piece about best practices for sampling TikTok videos, I would be a very interested consumer for that piece. We're probably going to use keyword searches. It's tricky because I was playing around with it yesterday. Searching for de-extinction, no hyphen, and searching for de-extinction with a hyphen, for example, yields somewhat different results. So we're going to have to play around with that. And we also have to figure out whether we want to set a minimum threshold for views or alternatively likes for videos to get into our sample. Once we have our sample, there are a number of things that we're thinking about coding for. One is account type in these initial searches. A lot of the content is Colossal Biosciences, so we might end up just having, was it Colossal or somebody else? Frames, including the ones I've already talked about, the preserving existing endangered species or the harming preservation efforts, but we suspect there are more frames out there. We need to identify those before we go ahead with our content analysis. What kinds of species? Dire wolves, dodos. There are others that, woolly mammoths. There are still others that Colossal Biosciences is interested in. Pop culture references, Game of Thrones, Jurassic Park, and Jurassic World. Are there more out there? Another thing we're interested in is who are the communicators in these videos. So the video that I showed you right at the beginning, the video presents the communicator's scientific credentials. So to what extent do these videos include scientists speaking identified as such? Because that might lend their messages more credibility. We know from a lot of research that communicator expertise and trustworthiness can influence the impact of messages. Also, I've done other research on gender and science communication on TikTok. Big picture is there looks like there's a gender gap in who communicates about science on TikTok. Does that spill over to this specific aspect of science communication on TikTok? And then engagement metrics on TikTok, think likes, saves, shares, comments. What message factors are related to how much engagement videos get? So by the end of this semester, we should have some findings on that. If the reliability is good, fingers crossed. With the results of that survey experiment and our content analysis later on this year, we would also like to do a more in-depth experiment testing the effects of full video messages on people's attitudes. So our message manipulation in the CES survey is very, very brief and not too realistic. So we're going to use the results of our content analysis to try to figure out what TikTok messages would be especially interesting to test on potential audience members. So we're looking to do we have a participant pool here at UD, so we're going to do a student sample with a between subjects design. Some people get one video, some people get a different video, and show them different videos about de-extinction. In terms of what we're going to manipulate, that remains to be seen. We could be manipulating frames, we could be manipulating species, we could be manipulating pop culture references, maybe a combination of those, although we won't have as much power. So that's going to be informed by the findings of the survey and the content analysis. In terms of dependent variables, again, we're interested in support for de-extinction, perceptions of its likelihood, uh, but we're also interested in branching out into behavioral intentions. So what kind of actions would people be interested or willing to take in regard to de-extinction? I'll get to some potential examples of that in a minute. We're also interested in some potential moderators, like prior media use. As does overall science fiction consumption moderate the impact of our video messages on people's attitudes, beliefs, and behavioral intentions? Does exposure to specific media like Game of Thrones or Jurassic Park and Jurassic World moderate the effects of our messages? Another theoretical framework we're interested in bringing in is diffusions of innovation. So one aspect of this theoretical framework is the idea that there are different categories of adopters of innovations, including technology. So some people are early adopters, some people are late adopters. Does what category you fall into moderate the effects of messages about de-extinction on what people think and are willing to do about de-extinction? We're also interested in some mediators. So do the videos influence people's beliefs about de-extinction, which then influence attitudes and opinions and behavioral intentions? Do different video messages and characteristics bring up different emotional responses? Like some messages about this might bring up warm and fuzzy feelings. I'll be very literal about that in a few seconds. Others might make people afraid, like your Jurassic Park Tyrannosaurus eating people. And we want to, because this is still a very new area of research, we want to ask some open-ended questions to capture people's reactions to the videos and more broadly, what they think about de-extinction. Now, in terms of behavioral intentions, so for example, we might ask people about their willingness to have pets that are de-extincted animals. So one of the things that Colossal Biosciences says that they've made is a woolly mouse, which is a mouse hybrid with a woolly mammoth, so it's got fuzzy hair. I mean, would you have one of these as a pet? They're pretty cute. They look pretty cute to me. Or, and this is not making this up, to me, this seems very on the nose for them, but this is directly from the Colossal Biosciences website. One of the things they're pitching is Pleistocene Park. Uh, so now they talk about this in their materials as an ecological preserve. Uh, but par park, Pleistocene Park, Jurassic doesn't seem coincidental to me. So we might ask people, would you visit a hypothetical Pleistocene Park, a preserve that has like woolly mammoths on it, dire wolves on it? So that's what we've done. That's where we're going. And so I did want to leave some time for questions. And this is just a joke. That's Sam Neill from Jurassic Park 3. I don't mind if you actually do ask questions related to Jurassic Park. He minds, but I don't mind.